The Vraxian Empire had conquered 17 worlds across 3 star systems when they first detected Earth's radio signals. High Commander Zixtal stood on the bridge of the flagship Eternal Dominion, his crystalline skin refracting the soft blue light of the command center as he studied the holographic projection of the blue planet. Their preliminary analysis suggested this would be their easiest conquest yet. "These humans," he spoke, his voice resonating with the characteristic harmonic undertones of his species, "they still burn fossil fuels. Their weapons are primitive. Their cities are fragile. They spend more time fighting among themselves than preparing for external threats." He gestured at the projection, causing it to zoom in on various urban centers. "Begin the standard psychological warfare protocol. Show them our power. They will surrender within days." The Vraxian War Council had spent months studying Earth's transmissions, analyzing human behavior patterns, and calculating resistance probabilities. Their models predicted a 98.7% chance of immediate capitulation upon demonstration of superior force. They had perfected their conquest strategy across multiple species: show overwhelming power, break the target species' will to fight, and establish control with minimal damage to valuable resources. The first strike came at dawn over the Pacific Ocean. 30 Vraxian warships, each the size of a small city, emerged from fold space in a perfect formation. They made no attempt to hide their arrival, broadcasting their presence across all electromagnetic frequencies. The message was clear: resist and be annihilated. Within hours, the Vraxian fleet had systematically disabled every major military installation across the Pacific Rim. Their energy weapons carved precise, devastating paths through naval fleets and air force bases. Ground-based defensive systems proved useless against their advanced shields. Human communications networks were overwhelmed with a single message, broadcast in every known language: submit or perish. High Commander Zixtal waited for the inevitable distress calls, the panicked surrenders, the breaking of human will. Instead, something unprecedented happened. Rather than chaos and surrender, the humans responded with organized resistance. Military channels erupted with encrypted communications. Civilian networks buzzed with rallying cries and coordination efforts. Even as their conventional weapons proved ineffective, humans continued to fight. "Impossible," Zixtal muttered, watching as yet another wave of human fighters launched, knowing they faced certain death. "Their behavioral patterns don't match any of our models." He turned to his chief psychologist, Venra, whose tentacles were writhing in agitation. "Explain this." "Commander," Venra's voice wavered, "they appear to possess a psychological trait we've never encountered. When faced with overwhelming odds, instead of surrendering, they become more determined. It's illogical." In London, Professor Sarah Chen worked frantically in her underground laboratory, analyzing data from the alien weapons. "Their energy signatures are unlike anything we've seen," she transmitted to the Emergency Scientific Council. "But there's a pattern here. We can work with this." In New Delhi, Colonel Rajesh Patel coordinated a guerrilla resistance network from a bunker deep beneath the city. "They expect us to break," he told his troops. "They expect us to run. But that's not what humans do. We adapt. We survive. We fight back." Across the globe, humanity began to reveal its true nature, not as a species that broke under pressure, but one that grew stronger. Underground networks formed with stunning speed. Scientists shared data across borders that had been hostile just days before. Military leaders coordinated strategies, pooling resources and knowledge. The Vraxians had made a critical error in their calculations. They had analyzed human weapons, human technology, and human conflicts. But they had failed to understand human nature itself. They hadn't accounted for the species' long history of facing extinction-level threats and surviving. They hadn't considered that a species that evolved as prey animals would develop an unshakable determination to survive. By the end of the first week, when the humans should have been broken and surrendering, they had instead managed to shoot down their first Vraxian fighter. The small victory sent shockwaves through both species. For the humans, it proved the aliens weren't invincible. For the Vraxians, it sparked the first seeds of doubt. High Commander Zixtal stood on his bridge, watching as humans continued to resist, continued to fight, continued to die rather than submit. His crystalline skin dulled with concern as he realized this conquest would be unlike any other. The humans weren't following the rules. They weren't breaking. They weren't running. They were adapting. They were learning. They were becoming more dangerous with each passing day. The Vraxian Empire had made a grave miscalculation. They had expected the humans to retreat. They were wrong. 3 weeks into the invasion, the Vraxian Tactical Command was in disarray. Their psychological warfare division had deployed every technique that had succeeded on other worlds. They had demonstrated their overwhelming power. They had destroyed symbolic structures. They had even begun targeting food and water supplies, a strategy that had broken the resolve of the mighty Centaurians in mere days. Yet the humans continued to fight. Sub-Commander Krelks reviewed the latest battle reports with growing concern. High Commander, the humans have developed primitive but effective countermeasures against our shield frequencies. We've lost 17 fighters in the last 2 days alone. They're learning too quickly. In the ruins of what was once Sydney, Australia, Dr. Emma Collins worked tirelessly in a makeshift laboratory built inside an abandoned subway tunnel. Around her, dozens of scientists and engineers from different countries collaborated, their previous nationalities forgotten in the face of a common enemy. They had been studying debris from downed Vraxian fighters, reverse engineering what they could. The crystalline structure in their hull plating, Emma explained to her colleagues, projecting a 3D model onto the tunnel wall. It's not just armor, it's part of their technology. Their entire approach to engineering is based on crystalline matrices. She pointed to a complicated diagram. If we can disrupt these patterns, we can do more than just damage their ships. We might be able to blind their targeting systems. Above ground, the Vraxians launched another psychological assault. This time, they targeted civilian populations with a new weapon, one that projected vivid hallucinations of their worst fears. It had driven 3 other species to mass surrender. But again, the humans proved different. In the devastated streets of Chicago, Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez led his resistance cell through the nightmare-inducing fields. Focus on what's real, he shouted to his team as they planted explosives at key points around a Vraxian ground installation. The fear isn't real. The mission is. His hand shook, his mind filled with terrifying visions, but he kept moving. They all did. The Vraxians watched in disbelief as humans pushed through their fear fields, their vital signs showing extreme terror, yet their actions remaining purposeful and determined. Some humans even seemed to grow more aggressive under the influence of the fear weapon, as if the additional stress was focusing their resolve rather than breaking it. High Commander Zixtal called an emergency meeting of his war council. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "Every species has a breaking point. Every species has limits. Where are theirs?" Venera, the chief psychologist, had spent days analyzing new data. "Commander, I believe we fundamentally misunderstood human psychology. Their historical records show a pattern we fail to recognize. This species has faced extinction-level events multiple times in their development. Instead of breaking them, each crisis made them more resilient. In Berlin, a teenage hacker named Lisa Weber discovered a way to piggyback signals onto the Vraxian communication network. Within hours, resistance cells across the globe could coordinate their attacks with unprecedented precision. The Vraxians found their tactical advantage eroding as humans began predicting their movements. Underground bunkers became centers of innovation. The same human trait that had once driven them to split the atom, reach the moon, and cure diseases now focused entirely on survival and resistance. Scientists who had once competed for grants and patents now freely shared discoveries and breakthroughs. The Vraxian command watched in growing horror as their casualties mounted. Human weapons, while still technologically inferior, were being modified and improved at an alarming rate. Worse, humans had begun using the Vraxians' own psychological warfare tactics against them. They had discovered that Vraxian crystalline biology made them particularly susceptible to certain sonic frequencies. In orbit, High Commander Zixtal received reports of human attacks striking with increasing effectiveness. They were learning, adapting, and evolving their tactics faster than any species the Vraxians had encountered. The humans had taken their initial weapons, crude projectiles and chemical explosives, and modified them based on their growing understanding of Vraxian technology. They should have broken by now, Zixtal muttered, watching another ground base fall to human resistance fighters. Every calculation, every model, every precedent suggested they would break. But in the burning cities and underground bunkers of Earth, humans continued to prove those calculations wrong. They weren't just surviving. They were getting stronger. Each failed Vraxian tactic taught them something new. Each small victory fueled their determination. The Vraxians had expected to find humanity's breaking point. Instead, they had inadvertently awakened something they had never encountered before. A species that transformed adversity into advantage, that grew stronger under pressure, that refused to accept defeat even in the face of overwhelming odds. And as the resistance grew stronger, as human innovations began to turn the tide of small battles, the Vraxians faced an uncomfortable realization. They had not found humanity's breaking point, because there wasn't one. 2 months into the invasion, the Vraxian Empire faced an unprecedented situation. Their xenobiologists and military strategists worked around the clock, desperately trying to understand the species that refused to follow any known patterns of conquest and submission. In his private chambers aboard the Eternal Dominion, High Commander Zixtal reviewed historical footage of human conflicts. His crystalline form dimmed with concern as he watched centuries of human warfare unfold before him. World wars, civil wars, revolutions. Humans had spent their entire history fighting, adapting, and surviving against seemingly impossible odds. We thought their internal conflicts were a sign of weakness, he addressed his senior staff. We were wrong. Each conflict taught them something new. Their entire history is a lesson in adaptation and survival. Deep beneath the ruins of Moscow, Dr. Anastasia Petrova made a breakthrough that would change the course of the war. Her team had been studying the captured Vraxian scout, not just its technology, but the being itself. The alien's crystalline biology, once thought to be its greatest strength, revealed an unexpected vulnerability. Their entire nervous system relies on crystalline resonance, Anastasia explained to the Global Resistance Network. It's why they're so advanced in energy weapons and shield technology. But it also means they're susceptible to specific harmonic frequencies. She paused, allowing the implications to sink in. We can't match their technology, but we can disrupt it at its most fundamental level. The Vraxians, meanwhile, were conducting their own studies. Their artificial intelligence systems processed thousands of years of human literature, art, and media, searching for understanding. What they found disturbed them. Humans had an entire genre of entertainment dedicated to fighting against overwhelming odds. They celebrated their defeats as much as their victories, learning from each failure. In the ruins of Cape Town, Commander Sarah Chen led a daring raid on a Vraxian research facility. Her team moved with practiced precision, using sonic disruptors based on Dr. Petrova's research. The alien defenders fell into disarray as the carefully tuned frequencies disrupted their neural patterns. For the first time, humans had a weapon that truly frightened the invaders. They're not just adapting our technology, Sub-Commander Krelix reported to the War Council. They're understanding us, finding weaknesses we didn't know we had. Every engagement teaches them more about how we think, how we fight, how we live. The human resistance had developed a new strategy. Instead of trying to match Vraxian technology, they focused on disrupting it. Small teams would strike at crucial systems, using their growing understanding of crystalline technology to cause cascading failures. The Vraxians found their sophisticated weapons and defenses turned against them by a species they had dismissed as primitive. In Tokyo, a group of quantum physicists discovered how to interfere with the Vraxians' fold space communications. The aliens' faster-than-light network, which had coordinated their entire empire, began to fragment. Individual ship commanders found themselves increasingly isolated, forced to make decisions without the collective wisdom of their hierarchy. Their greatest advantage was their unity. General Miguel Rodriguez told his international command staff, "Now they're learning what it's like to fight alone, like we've had to do. Let's see how they handle chaos and uncertainty." The Vraxian command structure, designed for perfect coordination and execution of predetermined strategies, struggled to adapt to the rapidly changing situation. Their ships, powered by crystalline matrices that had seemed invincible, now had to operate at reduced capacity to avoid human sonic weapons. High Commander Zixtal watched as his perfectly orchestrated invasion fell into disarray. The humans weren't just fighting back. They were systematically dismantling the Vraxians' technological advantages. Each human victory provided new data, new understanding, new weapons. "We studied their technology, their weapons, their obvious capabilities," Venra reported. "But we failed to understand their greatest weapon, their ability to learn, to adapt, to turn their enemy's strength into a weakness." In orbit, Vraxian ships began to alter their patrol patterns, trying to become less predictable. But the humans had spent millennia fighting each other, developing strategies for every conceivable situation. They had learned warfare through countless conflicts, while the Vraxians had relied on overwhelming technological superiority. The tide was turning, not through superior firepower or advanced technology, but through human ingenuity and determination. The Vraxians had expected to face primitive weapons and simple tactics. Instead, they found themselves fighting an enemy that grew stronger with each battle, that learned from every defeat, that turned the very act of resistance into a weapon. As the third month of the invasion began, the Vraxian Empire faced a horrifying realization. They weren't fighting a simple planetary conquest anymore. They were fighting a species that had turned adversity into an art form, that had made adaptation their greatest strength, that saw impossibility as a challenge rather than a limitation. They were fighting humanity, and they were starting to lose. 4 months into the invasion, Earth presented a sight unprecedented in galactic history. Former enemy nations pooled their resources. Scientists who had once competed now collaborated freely. The human race, faced with extinction, had achieved something remarkable: true global unity. In what remained of the United Nations building in Geneva, representatives from every surviving nation gathered to coordinate the resistance. The room hummed with determination as leaders who had once pointed nuclear weapons at each other now shared intelligence and resources. "The Vraxians thought our divisions made us weak," addressed Admiral Sarah Chen, now leading the combined Earth Defense Force. "Instead, our history of conflict gave us something they never had: the experience of fighting against superior forces, of finding ways to win when victory seems impossible." The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. In a makeshift lab in Buenos Aires, Dr. Carlos Martinez had been studying the crystalline remains of destroyed Vraxian ships. He discovered that the aliens' technological superiority was also their greatest vulnerability. Their entire civilization is built on crystalline technology, he explained to the Global Command. From their weapons to their communication systems, everything depends on perfect crystalline alignment. But crystals have natural frequencies that can shatter them. We don't need to match their technology. We just need to disrupt it. Across the planet, human industry transformed. Factories that had once produced cars now manufactured sonic disruptors. Computer companies reprogrammed their satellites to interfere with Vraxian communications. Even children contributed, their video game skills proving surprisingly valuable in operating the newly developed drone swarms that harassed Vraxian ships. High Commander Zixtal watched with growing alarm as his forces lost ground. The humans had learned to target the crystalline matrices that powered Vraxian technology. Worse, they had begun to understand the fundamental psychology of his species. "They're not just fighting our technology anymore," he reported to the Imperial Council. "They're fighting us. They understand how we think, how we react. They're using our own precision against us, creating chaos that our systems can't adapt to fast enough." In orbit, the first major coordinated counterattack began. A swarm of small, human-piloted craft approached the Vraxian fleet. The aliens prepared their standard defense protocols, but the humans had learned. Each craft broadcast a different frequency, creating a symphony of destruction that shattered crystalline systems across multiple ships. On the ground, resistance fighters struck with increasing precision. They had learned that Vraxian commanders, used to perfect order, struggled to adapt to rapid, unpredictable changes. Human forces would attack from multiple directions, using different tactics simultaneously, overwhelming the aliens' ability to form a coherent response. "Look at how they fight," Sub-Commander Krelix observed with a mixture of fear and admiration. "No central command, no perfect coordination. Each unit acts independently but somehow forms part of a larger strategy. It's beautiful in its chaos." The humans had discovered another advantage: their diversity. While Vraxian tactics were uniform and predictable, human forces drew on thousands of years of different military traditions. Chinese strategic thinking melded with American technological innovation, Russian tactical doctrine combined with African guerrilla warfare experience. In India, a team of programmers led by Priya Patel created an algorithm that could predict Vraxian response patterns. "They're too perfect," she explained. "Too logical. Once you understand their base programming, you can anticipate their moves." The Vraxian Empire, which had conquered 17 worlds through overwhelming force and technological superiority, found itself in an unwinnable situation. Their perfect strategies fell apart against an enemy that embraced chaos and uncertainty. Their advanced technology proved vulnerable to simple disruption. High Commander Zixtal studied the latest battle reports with growing despair. Human resistance forces had learned to target the crucial resonance frequencies that powered Vraxian ships. They had adapted their primitive projectile weapons to fire crystalline disrupting rounds. They had even begun using captured Vraxian technology, modifying it in ways the aliens had never considered. "They shouldn't be able to do this," he muttered. "No species learns this quickly. No civilization adapts this fast." But humanity had spent its entire existence adapting, surviving, evolving. Each crisis in their history had taught them something new. Each conflict had added to their collective knowledge of warfare and survival. Now, faced with extinction, they drew on all of it. The Vraxian Empire had united humanity in a way nothing else could. Old hatreds were forgotten. Ancient rivalries set aside. The entire species worked together, combining their knowledge, their creativity, their determination to survive. As the 5th month of the invasion began, the balance of power had shifted. The Vraxians still held technological superiority, but humans had learned to negate those advantages. The aliens still had more ships, more weapons, more raw power, but humans had something more valuable. They had hope. They had unity. And they had the unshakable determination of a species that refused to die. The final battle was approaching, and for the first time, humanity knew they could win. The final confrontation began at dawn on the 150th day of the invasion. The combined forces of humanity launched a coordinated assault against the Vraxian fleet, implementing everything they had learned over the past 5 months. High Commander Zixtal stood on his bridge, his crystalline form dulled with stress as he watched the human forces approach. Their attack patterns seemed chaotic, random, yet he had learned that with humans, nothing was truly random. There was always purpose behind their apparent disorder. "They're not just attacking us," he realized, watching the complex dance of human ships and fighters. "They're leading us into a trap, but knowing that doesn't help, because they've prepared for us knowing." The human fleet, cobbled together from modified civilian ships, military vessels, and captured Vraxian technology, engaged the alien armada. But this wasn't a traditional space battle. Each human ship broadcast a different frequency, creating a devastating web of sonic disruption that caused Vraxian crystalline systems to fail in cascading waves. Dr. Emma Collins, now aboard the flagship of the Earth Defense Force, monitored the effectiveness of their sonic weapons. "Their ship's crystalline matrices are destabilizing," she reported to Admiral Chen. "The frequencies are working even better than we predicted." The Vraxians attempted to adapt, to change frequencies, to modify their shields. But humans had anticipated this. 5 months of studying their enemy had taught them how the aliens thought, how they would react. Each Vraxian countermeasure was met with a prepared response. "They're not just fighting us," Sub-Commander Krillix realized with horror. "They're predicting us. All our strategies, all our tactics. They've learned to read us like we're children." On the ground, resistance forces launched simultaneous attacks on every remaining Vraxian ground installation. The aliens found their perfect formations broken by guerrilla tactics they couldn't counter. Their advanced weapons were rendered useless by simple sonic disruptors. Their commanders, trained in perfect order and precision, couldn't adapt to the controlled chaos of human warfare. High Commander Zixtal watched as his fleet was systematically dismantled. The humans weren't just winning. They were demonstrating a mastery of warfare that the Vraxian Empire, with all its technological superiority, had never achieved. "How?" he demanded. "How did they learn so much so quickly?" The answer came from his own chief psychologist, Venera, whose final report would later be studied in Vraxian military academies for centuries. "They never stopped learning. Every defeat taught them something new. Every victory showed them another weakness. They didn't just fight us. They studied us, understood us, and turned our own nature against us." The battle reached its climax as human forces deployed their final weapon, a massive array of orbital satellites, each broadcasting precisely calculated frequencies. The crystalline hearts of the Vraxian ships began to shatter. Their perfect technology, the pride of their empire, became their undoing. Admiral Chen's voice carried across all frequencies, reaching every human fighter and every Vraxian ship. "You came to our world expecting us to break. You thought we would run, surrender, give up. But that's not what humans do. We adapt. We survive. We overcome." The Vraxian fleet, once seemingly invincible, began to retreat. Ships disappeared into fold space, fleeing from the species they had so grievously underestimated. High Commander Zixtal, watching his forces crumble, made the final decision. "Send the signal," he ordered. "Full retreat. And send this message to the Imperial Council. Earth is not to be approached again. This species, they are not like the others. They do not break. They do not surrender. They only grow stronger." As the last Vraxian ships vanished from Earth's skies, humanity celebrated not just victory, but transformation. They had faced extinction and emerged stronger. Ancient enemies had become allies. Scientific rivals had become colleagues. The entire species had united and evolved. In the aftermath, as Earth began to rebuild, the lessons of the invasion were not forgotten. Humanity had learned that their greatest strength wasn't their weapons or their technology. It was their ability to adapt, to unite, to face impossible odds and find a way to win. The Vraxian Empire had come to Earth expecting to find an easy conquest. Instead, they had awakened something unprecedented in the galaxy. A species that grew stronger through adversity, that learned from defeat, that turned invasion into opportunity. They had expected humans to retreat. They were wrong. And in that mistake, they had helped forge humanity into something new. A united species ready to take its place among the stars, not as conquerors or victims, but as survivors who had proven that the greatest power in the universe wasn't technology or weapons. It was the unbreakable spirit of a species that refused to give up.